We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
The Allied rear guard is still holding Dunkirk against increasing German pressure. Heavy German field guns are pounding the beaches, and efforts to remove more men are continuing.
One says that a report, unconfirmed by Allied sources, of course, says that heavy fighting is taking place between the Germans and invasion forces on the Normandy Peninsula, about 31 miles southwest of Le Havre.
When you hear the stories of America and its Allied forces in World War II, you think about Operation Overlord, better known as D-Day. When you hear stories about Hitler's armies, you think about Blitzkrieg, the Third Reich, and the Battle of the Bulge. But when you talk about the battle in the Pacific, you know about Pearl Harbor, the battle at Midway, and you even remember when General Douglas MacArthur said, "I shall return." There was, however, one key element in the Pacific theater that helps America and its forces inch just a little closer to victory.
Melvin Barger was born September 9, 1925 in Norfolk, Nebraska. In 1943, he joined the Navy as machine motorist. His job was to help maintain power and propulsion of amphibious vessels, known as the LST, Landing Ship Tank.
I went to Saipan, our small boat crew. We were taken there on a merchant ship. And we got there before the island was secure, but we didn't get there for the initial landing. But the way it was in the Navy, you got credit for a battle if you were there before they secured the battle zone. You see, as long as there's still combat was going on, why, you got credit for a battle. You got a battle star. So I got a battle star for Saipan, and we came back to Pearl Harbor and Waianae, the training base there, and then I was shipped aboard LST 555, and that's where I was for the next 15 months.
September to November of 1944, the LST number 555 was involved in the capture and occupation of the southern islands of Palau and most of the campaigns in the Philippines.
We went right to the Solomons, which took us about 18 days. An LST was very slow. It stood for Landing Ship Tank, but some people called it Large Slow Target. It would only go about 9 or 10 knots. It was a diesel-powered ship. It used the same engines that are on locomotives, but they were fitted out for sea duty to be. It's your cooling system that has to be different on a ship. You see, a locomotive isn't in, well, it's just a different deal. But on the ship, you have fresh water for cooling on the engine, but you can't put salt water in the engine or you'll ruin it right away.
The utilization of the LST had gained such attention throughout the Pacific, our Allied forces in Britain recognized the importance of these slow yet effective vessels.
Prime Minister Winston Churchill once asked, "What is being done about designing and planning vessels to transport tanks across the sea for a British attack on enemy countries? These must be able to move 600 or 700 vehicles in one voyage and land them on the beach, or, alternatively, take them off the beaches."
So I stood watches in the engine room on this LST. We had 3 auxiliary engines, they were diesel engines too. And we went to the Palau Islands that was our first major landing. We got there, I think, about September 15th of 1944, an island called Angar, A-N-G-A-U-R, and we took Seabees and soldiers there. And the Marines, at the same time, were landing on Peleliu. That was an adjoining island. We could see the action on Peleliu when we were anchored there near Angar. So we were there maybe 3 or 4 days, and then we went up and took a chain of islands called the Ulithis, U-L-I-T-H-I. And this was interesting. They'd had the enemy, the Japanese, had a radio station there, and they had maybe 4 or 5 men in this radio station, but I guess nothing else. So apparently they just sent somebody ashore to get those guys. All morning, they were minesweepers were working in this atoll exploding mines. We could just hear this all morning. And then a friend of mine, we were allowed to go ashore on one of these big islands, and I don't remember, they had names, but I don't remember the name of it. And we walked across this island, and that was the only time I ever got ashore in the Ulithis. But it was very interesting to see this little radio station, and these enemy soldiers had even been trying to raise a little garden there. They were trying to grow watermelons, for crying out loud. We then went to Leyte, which is in the Philippines, and we got there on October 25th, 1944. And the initial landing on Leyte was October 20th. But October 25th turned out to be the worst day. That's when the kamikazes had started and so on. And we saw a couple of those. And my job when we were at General Quarters was I was the loader on a 20 millimeter gun. And we had 7 20 millimeter guns and, wait a minute, I think we had 12 20 millimeters guns and 7 40 millimeters, something like that on our ship. Wow. And so we, with a bunch of LSTs in the harbor, you had quite a lot of anti-aircraft fire when a plane came over. Never saw more than one plane, but every ship in the harbor would be shooting at it. And of course, all that stuff comes back down. And we had some of our men wounded. It was from our own fire, really, or the fire from other ships. But that's something that can't be avoided. You have to be out there on deck manning the guns, and that can happen. Well, then we got into August. We were still at Okinawa, and they started talking about the war being over by this time. August 6th, they dropped the atomic bomb, and we were only about 500 miles away from where it was dropped. It was dropped on Hiroshima. Some people pronounce that Hiroshima. And then on August 9th, they dropped it on Nagasaki. And that apparently brought the Japanese to the peace table, because then they started talking about the surrender. But August was kind of a bad month. Some of the ships in the harbor were hit by kamikazes during August, and it wasn't until September that the war really ended. I think it ended in Tokyo Bay on September 4th of 1945. And of course you see lots of footage of that, of the surrender.
While serving aboard LST 555, he received 5 battle stars for his service. Out of the 250,000 men that served aboard the landing ship tanks in the Pacific, Melvin Barger was among the many that helped create the LST Association. This association is responsible for preserving the history and the culture of these vessels. After his service in the Navy, Mr. Barger worked in the oil fields of Southern California and auto industries in Detroit. He later became a graduate of Jackson Community College and the University of Toledo.
But I had hoped that World War II would be the war to end wars too, but it wasn't. And I don't know what the answer is to war. I wish we had one.